Hi, my name is Alain Hunkins. I'm the author of Cracking the Leadership Code and CEO of Hunkins Leadership Group. And what I do is help high-achieving people become high-achieving leaders. On this episode of Leadership and Loyalty, Dov and I will be talking about some great things. First will be how the next generation of leadership is going to be about giving away power rather than hoarding it. We'll also be talking about the need to be the facilitator in chief as opposed to being a fixer. And if you don't believe me, you should ask your spouse or your partner. They'll tell you what we're talking about. And third, we'll look at some practical tools on how you can energize your team that have nothing to do with doing. And as a bonus, you'll also learn how you should end every meeting by asking for a receipt. Want to know what that means? You'll have to tune in. So stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Hey, do me a quick favor. Would you send me a note, DM me on one of the 4 social media outlets, big ones, and let us know what platform do you listen to the show on? Is it Apple Podcasts? Is it Spotify? Maybe there's some app. Tell us how you're listening to us. How are you tuning into the show? And if you tell me by DMing me or sending one of those messages, what's been one of your favorite episodes and why, I'm going to pick a winner, give a $1,500 prize, and you could be one of those people. Let me know by just dropping me a line. So let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? Well, have you considered the context through which you lead? Now, what I mean by that is, if there is a code to understanding and applying effective leadership, have you considered what that code might honestly be? Stay tuned, because that's where we're going on today's show. I am your host, Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing that transforms everything in your business from meaning into action. Curious to know more? Go to dovbaron.com. This episode actually is brought to you in part by our other podcast, Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how might we bring people together who completely disagree? This is exactly what your heart, your mind, your soul has been craving. It's your chance to sit in on some real and fascinating conversations with some of the world's most interesting people. We're talking about astronauts, neuroscientists, philosophers, neurosurgeons, holy people, quantum physicists, skeptics, Grammy award-winning entertainers. I mean, it's a pretty phenomenal lineup. And if you want to simply find out more, you're just curious to know more, well, find out how you can sink your teeth into the delicious Curiosity Bites. Simply go to dovbaron.com. As always, you can find both of our shows on the usual outlets for podcasts. And we always need your help in staying relevant. So please get over there. Do us a favor, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And if you are a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. We are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. Depending on what group you find yourself in, you might be someone who has, at some time or another, been led by someone who's leading like it's 1955. Or for that matter, you might be a leader who finds themselves living out bad habits inherited from previous generations of leaders and wondering, how can you take ownership? How can you transform your leadership? How can you crack the leadership code to build yourself into a strong leader who builds strong leaders? Well, let's find out together, because our guest today is Alain Hunkins. Alain believes that he literally has cracked that code on what it takes to lead, not just in 2021, but far, far beyond. Alain Hunkins is a faculty member at Duke Corporate Education. Alain's writings have been featured in Fast Company, Forbes, Inc., Chief Executive, Chief Learning Officer, and Business Insider. He's leadership speaking and coaching. Through that, he's worked with Walmart, Pfizer, Citigroup, General Electric, State Farm Insurance, IBM, General Motors, Microsoft, and a whole lot more. He is the best-selling author of Cracking the Leadership Code, 3 Secrets to Building Strong Leaders. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and help me to welcome Alain Hunkins!
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for that warm introduction. I'm so excited to be here with you today.
Yeah, it took a while, mate. We've had deaths in your family, deaths in my family. We've had a pandemic since we first spoke. There's been a couple of delays.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that you're here now. So where I always like to start the show is by addressing sort of the unconscious side of leadership, which is the context. And what I mean by that is, in the context of leadership development, what is the question that we should be asking, that looking for the answer to, that we're just not? What do you think it is?
Great. Such a good question. I think, as a leader, great question to ask yourself is, are you willing to let go of all the trappings and perks that power gives you? Because let's face it, power can be a bit addictive. And in any organization, there's a hierarchy, which means there's power. And the question is, and we don't talk about it because we're people. But the fact is that power differential, the power to hire, to fire, to promote, to shun, is very real. And if we don't come to grips and put it out in front of us and deal with it, it is dealing with us. And I think as we look moving forward, especially when we have Gen Y and Gen Z as the majority of the workforce, they are refusing to play by the old power rules. They're going, you know what? I'm not going to put up with this kind of command and control stuff that potentially Gen Xers and baby boomers were willing to do. And so the question I would ask myself is, if I want to lead, what's my motive and how much is my desire to be in charge, to be in control, and to be in power affecting that? And if I'm not really clear on what it is that I'm doing and why I'm doing it, it's going to be a big issue.
Okay, that's a great question, but it inevitably brings up the seduction of power, right? So if we have a leadership role, we are likely to be seduced by that power. The old saying that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So. If you've climbed that hierarchy, which is changing its form, we know that, but if you're climbing that hierarchy and you've made it to the top, you're not likely to give that stuff up too easily. And so, particularly if you've been led by command and control leaders, this is what I'm saying about if you've had that leader and now you've found yourself, even though you didn't want to be that leader, you're kind of that leader because that's the model you had. What do we need to address on that? Because, as I said, that power is very seductive.
Yeah, what we need to address is the often unconscious belief that, wait a minute, the thought is, I paid my dues. I went along to get here. The next generation should have to pay their dues too. And so there's this sense of almost this hazing ritual that you have to go through to get there. And are you willing to go, you know what? Life is changed. Society has changed. Times have changed. I need to change. What if I become the generation of leader that breaks that chain that says, do as I say, ultimately because I say so, right? Which is engaging in power struggle. And as you and I both know, Dove, and many listeners probably hopefully know too, is at best, when you engage in power struggle, at best, you're going to get compliance, and that's it. You're not going to get commitment. You're not going to get loyalty. You're not going to get dedication. So the question is, are you willing to have that hazing ritual, as it were, stop with you?
Okay. But again, the psychology of it is the seduction of the power.
Yeah.
I paid my dues. I took the kick in the nuts every week from my boss. and yeah, okay, I want to change it. But you see, I'm looking at this at a bigger picture level, Alain,
Mhm.
because yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I have no disagreement with what you're
Yeah.
saying, and I have no disagreement with Gen Y, Gen Z
Mhm.
won't put up with it. But at the same time, there are leaders holding on, yeah, with the ends of their fingers, but they're holding on to the power in the form that they had it, and they're not letting go.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I know they're dinosaurs, and I know they're going away in less than 10 years, but
Yeah.
that 10 years could be a pretty miserable 10 years. So if I'm number two in the role, if I'm next up, how do I prepare myself? If I'm looking at that leader who is the taskmaster, the command and control leader, how do I not fall into that pattern and step into what is the new leadership?
Well, and this is such a good question because ultimately it's very hard to become something that you have never seen modeled.
Exactly.
It's really hard.
Yep.
And so, first, I'd say seek out models of what we'll call this new style of leadership. I kind of call it going from the commander in chief to being the facilitator in chief. Because when you adopt this facilitative mindset, I mean, ultimately, you will, as all of us do, you will continue to do behaviors that you get rewarded for. And if you can start to recognize the joy you can bring and the effectiveness you can have when you take on this role of, instead of seeing yourself as everything comes in me and I am the decider, but actually realize everything is about me facilitating, which means sometimes I am the most important person and sometimes I am the least important person. But to show, instead of trying to be the superhuman of the team and being a superhero, is actually, can you make your team feel super? Because guess what? They're going to perform so much better. You're going to reap the benefits of the results. All in all, it's going to be a much more empowering, exciting, and effective place to be and working. And people are going to love you as being a leader. And who doesn't want that kind of adulation? So I think, yeah, let that feed your ego. Let that feed your power. Do I have an ego? Absolutely. Do I have a certain want of control? But it's a different way of thinking about control and power. I mean, I'm still in charge, but I'm not having to prove it in this old-fashioned way. Instead, what I'm doing is using that platform for the betterment of all. And we're going to get better results. We're going to be more conscious about how we do it. And people are going to want to stick around a lot longer too.
Give us an example of how to move into facilitator in chief. Particularly, let's talk to the leaders who are already at the top, who recognize, who have enough self-awareness that they're going, yeah, I'm kind of doing the commander in chief thing, and it's command and control, and I don't really want to do it, but I don't really know how to do anything else. And I get the idea. I like what Alain's saying about this facilitator in chief, but I have no idea where to start because I've been old school. Where do they start?
Sure. So actually, I'll answer the question via story. And I'll tell you about this guy I work with named Matt. So Matt was a district manager for a US-based national retail chain. Now, when Matt started, he got promoted from being a store manager to a district manager. This is retail. And when he started, there was 100 district managers across the country, and they ranked them all by performance. And he started off, he was 84th on the list. And he stayed down in the mid 80s for a number of years. Now, when I met Matt, he was actually ranked the #1 top ranked, highest performing district manager. So I said, so Matt, that's quite a shift to go from 84 to #1. Talk to me about your process. What changed? He said, so when I got promoted, and I think a lot of the leaders listening to this might recognize this in themselves. When I got promoted, I thought my job, I went from manager to district manager. I thought my job was to be the fixer, right? I was supposed to fix everything and make everyone work better. And so in his world, every single morning, they get a printout of key performance indicators. They call it the hot list in their industry. And so the first thing that Matt would do is he'd get out the printout of the hot list and he would see what was in red. It was color coded. And obviously red is not measuring up. So he'd circle these things. He'd look at what stores were in red. Then he'd hop in his car and he'd drive around his district, going from store to store and telling the store manager, this is wrong. You need to do this. You need to do this. Fix this. Do this. Fix this. And he said, I was doing that for a year and a half, and I was struggling. I was going nowhere. He said, I think the day I hit bottom was the day that I realized there were people on the teams in the stores, they were quitting, and I didn't even know what their names were. So it was for Matt, he had this wake up call. It's like, I have to change my approach. And so he talked to some mentors. And so what he ended up doing is he realized, oh, when I go into the stores, instead of coming in with a hot list and going, you need to do this, like, I'm working with people. Maybe I should actually build some rapport, build some relationship with them. So he started asking his store managers about their lives outside of work, what was going on. So he built some relationship. Then he still had the hot list with what was in red, but instead of circling it and saying, you need to fix this, he would share the data with them and say, hey, here's the issue. What do you think we should do? And so he led by listening first and getting their input, and then he'd calibrate his response based on what he was hearing back from them. And then together, they would co-create solutions together. And when he started applying this intentionally and deliberately over days and weeks and months, his performance started going up. And the way Matt described it to me, he said, what I finally realized was that the key to hitting the numbers was to stop focusing on the numbers, but instead to start focusing on the people, because it was the people that were delivering the numbers. And he said the coolest part was the fact that when he started, at 84, he said, I was working so much harder and I was so much more stressed, and my team was so much more stressed than we are at number one. So not only are we getting greater results, we are having so much more fun than we ever did otherwise. And so for me, Matt's story brings to life what I call the 3 secrets to building strong leaders. First is connection, right? So he built those real relationships. Number 2 was around communication. So he led by listening to seeking to understand someone else's points of view. And third was collaboration, which is let's work together to co-create solutions together. So connection, communication, and collaboration, to me, they are the foundations of becoming this facilitator in chief.
Right. So, when you and I spoke before, we had talked about these 3 C's. And so I want to sort of bring these down into the nuts and bolts. I mean, you just did it with building that connection, which is vital. But again, oftentimes the leader feels like they don't know how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I can talk about all these ideas and theories about how they can do it, but oftentimes it just feels bloody awkward.
Yeah.
Particularly when you've built the rep as a command control leader.
Yeah.
So now people are looking at you going, is this guy going to Bissell Meshuggah? I mean, is he going crazy? What's going on?
Yeah.
Now he's asking me about my kids, and all he was doing before was screaming at me about numbers.
Yeah.
What's up? Like there's, going to get a bit suspicious about that.
Yeah. And so you bring up a great point here, Doug, which is, any of these techniques, when taken out of the context of, I learned this in a course and I need to do this. Whenever you get into that, you're trying to game it. And look, humans have got really good BS detectors, right? You do, I do, everyone does. So if you're faking this to try to get some kind of result because someone on a podcast told you to do this, you're not going to get very far. And I'd say rather than trying to do some kind of a personality overhaul, an easy place to start is just think, instead of leading by telling people, pause, stop, and ask an open-ended question. Like, what's going on, or what challenge are you facing? And then here's the asterisk to the question. Then you have to shut up and listen, right? Which for a lot of leaders, that's the hard part.
You're edgy. Shut up and listen. That's exactly what it is, right?
Yeah. It's shut up and listen. And then, but really, and listen, not to respond and show them how smart you are, how what they're saying ties into your plan. No, really be spacious enough to listen to them, to seek to really understand, and to hopefully affirm what they're saying because it's real for them. So how do you validate and appreciate what they're doing? Because they're working hard. And, it's interesting how many of us as leaders, when we have our ego, we don't stop to consider other people's reality as valid as ours. And I know that's harsh to say, but, if I think that my world is more important, people are going to smell that out. Going back to
Well,
the
it's
BS
also, in fairness to everybody, that is human nature. It is human nature that my reality is more important than your reality, whoever I am, whoever you are. Um, that's it. So for me, the piece there is in understanding that's human nature. Okay, that's going to happen. Do I have to let that run the show is a different story.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
saying it's human nature, it's also human nature to protect your family. So should I just kill everybody who comes to my door? Well, of course not. Right.
Yeah.
So it's human nature to want to eat and feed my family. Should I just go out and kill the next beast that passes by? Of course not. Right. I can go down to the supermarket and buy a packet of whatever. Right. So it's not about what. So once we understand that, we get this primal psychology of understanding, okay, at a primal level, yes, I need to be an alpha. I need to deal. I need to be in power. And that is my impetus.
Yeah.
But I can choose another place. I can choose, instead of command and control, to facilitate. I can choose to connect, to communicate, to find how we can collaborate.
Yeah.
And I think you brought up a really good point, which is rather than looking at things as a complete personality transplant, which fair enough, some people do need, but instead of that, but just understanding that, the piece I would say to everybody is, is call in the people who are your direct reports and say, listen, I mean, you may not use my words, but something like, listen, I've been a bit of a tool. I've done the command and control thing, and I'm probably going to do it, but I want to be a better leader. Can you help me? Right? And that level of vulnerability is so freaking powerful that everybody's guard drops. Everybody goes, oh, okay, right. And it's like, and so here's the thing. I want to listen. I want to really communicate with you and make a better connection with you. And I want to be able to collaborate with you. So when I override you, do me a favor. Remind me, I want to be a better leader. I can do that. Yeah. You have my permission. Like that's the passing down that power that is so powerful that you're talking about. And I just think it's so important and we need it moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've touched on such an important thing. And I know you've talked about this many times, that sense of understanding vulnerability is a strength, right? That openness is a strength, and it is a strength. And why that's particularly important now versus in 1955 is because that vulnerability and openness reflects the nature of our digital age, right? Where we have transparency and everyone has equal access to information. In 1955, a few people could hoard limited bits of information and spoon feed it out to whoever needed to have it. That is not the world we live in. And so our leadership style needs to reflect the nature of how information is shared, is processed, and acted upon if you're going to be able to thrive in this 21st century digital world.
Now, as we come to the end of part one here, I want to make sure that people know how they can find out more about you, about your beautiful book that is right over your shoulder if you're watching us on video, how they can find out more about you, about your book, and about your resources. So please tell everyone how they can find out more about you, Alain.
Sure. Easiest place to go is for all things Alain Hunkins is alainhunkins.com, www.alainhunkins.com. You can download the first chapter of the book for free. There's another ebook about navigating trust there. We've got articles and links to other things as well. So please stop by and have a look and hopefully get some insights that can be helping you become a better leader.
And of course, we'll make sure that all those are in the show notes. We're going to be back in just one click. But until then, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you can become a chief facilitator rather than a commander-in-chief. We'll see you in one click. Stay curious, my friends. Stay curious.